learn to work with whatever element it is that calls you. Because for me, it's water, it's wind. And, when we're afraid of anything, we're really just afraid of ourselves. Like, there was times where I was woken up in the middle of the night, high windstorms, like dead sleep, just woken up and a voice saying, you need to go outside. And the level of fear that I would feel because no, I'm not going outside. It's, like this, like, it's going to take me. It's going to take me someplace, right? But that is also one of my elements. And that part of me, I was still struggling with. I was still afraid of myself, and that's another lesson that I've learned and come to realize is how much I've been running from myself.
Welcome to the Earthmates podcast. Together, we explore how to find your path from climate anxiety to community action by asking, who are you? Because just like any relationship, that matters. So get ready to be raw and real, but also playful and silly with me, Chief Relationship Officer Amber Peoples, as we discover what's possible through the lens of the 5 Earth archetypes. Curiosity and subscription buttons highly encouraged. Welcome, friends. Today, as we record this podcast session, the sun rose just a couple of hours ago after the longest night of the year, the winter solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere. And what's interesting about tapping into that energy is during this tipping point, there's this inertia that has to shift as the Earth moves on its axis. So, for example, today, we get 1 extra minute of sunlight. Tomorrow we'll get 5, and then the next day we'll get 10. And it's this really amazing sensation to be a part of that and be embodied within that energy of changing inertia during this time of the solstice. And so as we sit with that, as I plant that seed, you could be listening to this maybe at a totally different time of year. So I'm going to count to 5 silently in my head. And during that time, I encourage you to tap into what's around you at the moment. And so starting now. Thank you. Now, I am delighted to introduce you to our embodiment Earth relationship today. Her name is Kawenniiosta Jock. Kawenniiosta and I are new to each other's worlds. But one of my colleagues at Better Worlds shared videos of her work, particularly with the Waterfall Unity Festival. And I was really excited to have this conversation. Because in those videos, I was enthralled by how much she used the word embodied to describe life. So within a short little call that we've had together, we agreed to talk today because embodied conversations are the ones that she feels is so important to be having right now. So welcome, Kawenniiosta. I'm so delighted to have you here. I'd love you to introduce yourself and to hear more about what compels you to talk about embodiment.
Sego, Kawenniiosta Jock, sa wagata hiuni, kanya kahaga ni wagahan jodo, tano skohale, yaskohale niwe tkitilo. And hello, my name is Kawenniiosta. To all the listeners, to all the viewers, thank you for having me here today, Amber. My journey to embodiment started on the winter solstice 3 years ago. Growing up in Akwesasne, which is Kanien'kehá:ka, people of the Flint Nation territory up in upstate New York near the Canadian border. We're very much still in tune with the natural world. We are still in tune with our festivities of giving thanks to and expressing our gratitude to all of creation.
Unfortunately, the 5 remaining minutes of Kawenniiosta's beautiful and personal story about her people and herself was not salvageable for broadcast. So the podcast picks up where I reflect on her response and ask her to share more. You can access the deleted clip by signing up for the Earth Archetypes membership. Links are in the show notes. And now, back to the episode. So some of the jewels that I heard as I was listening to that description of embodiment is journey to self. I also heard true to self, which is an interesting combination. And then one word that I don't think you specifically said, but what kept coming to mind was a sense of surrender. When you were talking about kind of your prayer or your intention to creator of show me, please show me what you want me to see. There felt like a level of surrender in that.
Yes.
And then another word that I heard was commitment. And he talked about committing to going back to that water every month, every moon cycle. And I'm curious if there's anything within that you want to talk more about that feels like it intertwines together, or by hearing a reflection of what you just said and bringing those things to the surface, if that helps clarify or give insight on anything that you just shared.
Well, I really learned to work with my life force. And, this is something that I've been wanting to kind of speak about. I'm seeing it a little bit more here and there. And, it's really, I've really had to work on being comfortable even just around the topic, because it's become so, when we're talking about our menstrual blood, we're because of I don't know if it's just our people, but because of residential schools and the generational trauma that's come down, those are things that were we were told to hide. We weren't. I remember there was a time in our history that we weren't allowed to go outside and be grateful for things. We weren't allowed to do our normal, I don't like to say ceremony. I'm really trying to use other words as I'm learning about English definitions of words, right? And words are spells. So, I'm still trying to get out of it, but I'm still programmed. And, that was another part of this journey, was the unprogramming of a lot of things, a lot of deep rooted beliefs I had to let go of. Kind of reintegrate. I had to reintegrate back into nature. As much as I thought I was connected, this was so much deeper. And I used my blood as an offering. And I mean, my life has changed since. I never included anybody in none of these things. It wasn't used. I always had intention. And I think intention with everything we do is so important. It's also hard sometimes for me to remember to have an intention with certain things that I'm doing, or, but I am a mom of 6, and I am beyond busy. So, but just trying to learn that and then trying to teach my children. But yeah, I mean, just learning to work with that again and know that it's okay.
Yeah, that piece of its okayness. It almost feels like I took a big, deep breath when I heard you say that gift of, I don't know if it's permission, or what the feeling is. But this gift of reintegrating into nature, as you described it. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that you talked about words being spells.
Mm-hmm.
And yet also I know that with embodiment, one of the key pieces of it is that words are almost perhaps a kind of a pale translation in comparison to the experience of it, the embodiment of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder what your thoughts are around language when it comes to this. I know one of the things that you talked about at the Waterfall Unity Festival was the difference between English and the language of your people, and that there's a pretty distinct difference between those two in regards to their ability to communicate this felt sense of embodiment. And I'd wonder if you're able to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I am an alumni of the Akwesasne Freedom School, which is an all-immersion Kawenniiosta Mohawk language elementary, basically, and middle school. And so I grew up only speaking my language. That's what I learned, how to read and write in my language. Everything I was taught was in my language. And but when I got out of middle school and went out to high school, and then I moved away as a young adult, I kind of lost a lot because I didn't have anybody to speak to. And so once I started having children, it started coming back to me. And my children are students of the school now. So I do everything that I do is in my language to the best of my ability. So it does make a difference because our language is not literal translation of the English. It's more descriptive.
Yeah, I find that interesting because that's the word that you used at the festival was English. I believe you described it as direct, and then your language you talked about it being descriptive. And I wonder about when you're having these experiences with nature, when you're doing the journey back to self. Do you feel like that's a key piece of it? Is that it is so much more of a descriptive journey compared to a direct journey?
Well, for myself, it makes it that much more, I don't know, real, I guess, because everybody's languages, especially Ongwehongwe, anything that's not English, it all carries a vibration. And they say that our languages vibrate at the highest frequency, which is love frequency, right? And so it definitely does make a difference when we're speaking our own language and doing these types of things, because that's the vibration that we're carrying forward, we're putting forward. That's part of the intent.
Yeah, I love that. I love the imagery of these experiences, these embodiments as that vibrational piece, because that's what our bodies are doing anyway. They're constantly vibrating to different energies and tones and emotions. Do you find that you work with sound when you're doing these embodiment practices?
Most definitely, yeah. Most definitely. Yesterday, for instance, while I was at the water, acknowledging, the winter solstice, the sun, the moon was out. It was probably 2:00 in the afternoon. I was standing by the water, and it was like a really big falls too. And I kind of went downstream, and I had my eyes closed, and I was standing there. And even you watching you reminded me of like when you're going like this, right? And I was standing there with my eyes closed, really just trying to listen and tune into the water, just the wind, everything around me. And I was kind of moving my body like that. And so then what I started seeing within my body was like the figure 8, and I was just kind of like going back and forth. And then I was listening to the water coming up to the, like the what would you call that? The tide, like, hitting the rocks, going in and out. And through all this, like, I've connected that to our breath and how the breath, when we're breathing like that, and think of the ocean, right? How the tides go in and goes out, in and out. And what I seen through meditation was our breath is like when we're breathing out and in, it's the same thing. It's like connected to the moon, and the water's just going, like, it's pulling, right? And that's her breathing. That's our mother breathing. And so it's like, that's what I mean when I talk about working at a cellular level. I work at a cellular level. Like, those are the things that I'm in tune with. Those are the types of things that I see and that I get out of this work that I'm doing. Just making those connections just on a little bit deeper level, I guess.
And more like all of the different senses keep coming up in the conversation. The sound, the visuals that you mentioned. We talked about the physicality of the movement, and that's our our peripheral sensations. And what I wonder about then is, you talked about this experience of you got to grow up in a way that did attune you to it in some ways. And then you had kind of a teenage time frame where you were removed from that. And then, especially in the last 3 years, you've returned to it. And I'm so curious about that moment that you talked about 3 years ago, especially for somebody that may be listening that hasn't really felt that before. And they wonder, how do I tap into that? What do I do? Where do I start? And so I'm wondering about, for you, that moment that happened 3 years ago that led to this sense of asking the creator to show you what it wants you to see, and committing to that. Is there some description about that experience that might be able to help people that are trying to figure out how to make a similar commitment?
Well, I mean, I would say that I know we all have our certain elements that we're really connected to, and to maybe just explore all elements. Some people like to build fires, and then they feel something around the fire. Right. And if you're around the fire and you're feeling something, I would really suggest that you ask, you kind of like tune into that. If if you feel something when you're around water, like a lot of people will say, it's so calming when I have to be in water. Like, it just calms me. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's just something about water. If that is your thing, then work with that. Learn to work with whatever element it is that calls you. Because for me, it's water, it's wind. And, when we're afraid of anything, we're really just afraid of ourselves. Like, there was times where I was woken up in the middle of the night, high windstorms, like dead sleep, just woken up, and a voice saying, you need to go outside. And the level of fear that I would feel, because like, no, I'm not going outside. It's, like there was like this, like, it's going to take me someplace, right? But that is also one of my elements. And that part of me, I was still struggling with. I was still afraid of myself, and that's another lesson that I've learned and come to realize, is how much I've been running from myself. Like I've spent, there wasn't really too much of a gap between like being like that little gap that we're talking about, from when I was a young adult to now. That was like my early 20s. And then, still like out in nature, still doing gardening, still like picking medicines in the woods, still foraging, still growing food, like all of those things, still doing that. But 3 years ago when I started this journey, it was just so intense and it was just on another level that I had never experienced before. And so I just wanted to make that clear. And am I going to choose self this time and follow my intuition, or am I going to run and block it? You know, and at that point in my life where I was at, what else do I have to lose? You know, I was really, I had left my relationship, and I didn't want to hurt anybody anymore. I didn't want to be hurt. I just didn't want to keep repeating cycles. And I just really wanted to learn about myself. And that's what really sparked, is for the first time when I walked away from my relationship, I felt like that was the first time that I chose myself, because I was so used to putting everybody else's needs before mine as a mom. You know, I'm heavily engaged in my community work. So it was like the first time that I actually just chose myself. And every time you choose self, it's like you just shoot off, you know, into like the next level. And so, especially when you really embody it and really mean it, you know, you level up. Not as easy as it sounds, but it's worth it, you know.
Yeah, I think it's almost maybe an example of a place where English is a really tough language to use to describe this, because kind of the dichotomy I heard you say was choosing self compared to running from self. And running, like I can see this visual almost of this actual action. And I think choose is such a harder word to figure out, like what's the action there. And so I'm wondering for you, like you used that really great example with the windstorm. And for you, the choice was to, I don't think it was not be afraid. I think you were still afraid, but you still went anyway.
No, I didn't. I
Oh, you
didn't.
didn't?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't. And that's where our blockages comes in. That's where we get held back, right? And those are all the things that we have to unlock within ourselves. What were you just saying before that?
Well, it was this idea of like trying to imagine what the action is in choosing.
To face yourself. To go through all the emotion, to go through like everything, no matter if it's good or bad, to just face yourself.
To experience.
Yeah. Like all of you.
Yeah. Like in that moment with the windstorm, to go experience that windstorm.
Yeah, because I can, like the way my life's been going now, I'm pretty sure that wind had something for me. You know, it was a lesson or something that I needed to be shown or taught or something. But it happened a few times, and it was in the middle of winter. So, you know, in winter when those really strong windstorms come.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I was born in the middle of a blizzard in Minnesota. So I came in with that energy into this planet.
Yeah. So no, I didn't. And, you know, I think about that, and I've been working with it though, learning to work with that part of me, and also recognizing how, you know, it kind of like, kind of slows you down a little bit.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that word that you said before, that commitment to making that choice, because it does take energy. Like it was probably cozier and less energy to stay warm and cuddled up inside compared to going out into that cold windstorm. So there is the energy that's requested in that process. And making the commitment to use the energy that we have as energy beings to walk into those experiences.
Well, the way that I had started this whole thing 3 years ago was because of, you know, around choosing myself, right? the clarity I started to gain, and the clear instructions that I was being given, and even learning to accept that and to say, like, okay, I'm not crazy. Somebody is speaking to me. And in learning to, that's your intuition, and then learning to accept that part of you, learning to follow it, learning to trust. And that's really how I started, because I was getting clear instructions on what I needed to do. And for 6 months prior, I ignored those instructions. I did. It was just so like, yeah, right, this is not happening to me, that kind of thing. And then it got to the point where every month the same thing I was being told around my moon time. And I'm just like, okay, I mean, like, what else, all right, let's do it then, and then really, but then when I got out there, I realized what was happening, and so that's when I decided to make that commitment. And here I am 3 years later. I'm back on my ancestral homeland, which is 4.5 hours away from the reservation. This is where our people were prior to the wars, prior to the United States government coming in and forcing our people to relocate. I am back on an ancestral Turtle Clan village, literally on the land of my people. And I am doing that same work here. And so it's really a deep work that has been happening. And the gifts that I've been given and shown, in all aspects have been, I mean, I really don't even have the words. Like, it's incredible. It hasn't been easy, but, there's a reason for it.
Yeah, and since we haven't talked a whole lot about what you do, what can you share with our listeners about this transition to? My understanding is you're farming this land, but it sounds like there's a bunch of other stuff going on too. Like, is that where the school is as well, or is that back at the reservation? Let's kind of catch people up a little bit on what it is that you're doing on a daily basis, because I think that's another question people have, is if they start listening to these messages in whatever way they get them. Maybe, some people maybe hear a voice, some people maybe see an image, some people maybe have a sensation. I think there's lots of different communication routes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people may wonder, well, how do I do that and live a daily life at the same time? And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that, about what your daily life looks like.
Well, so the Akwesasne Freedom School that I was talking about is back home in Akwesasne, which is 4 hours away. My thing is I want to build a healing center, and based on the journey back to self. And these are the things that I do want to teach. This farm came up for sale, and I am also the co-executive director of the Waterfall Unity Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization that you can find us at waterfallunityalliance.org. And you can hear or listen or read about, the things that we're doing here. But the fact that this was on a Turtle Clan village, we knew that we had to buy this land. The farm came up for sale. It was an established U-pick berry farm, been in operation for 60 plus years. This is our homeland, and so somebody had to come here, somebody had to establish. And I was just at that place in my life where you reach a place with self where you have worked so hard to get out of the toxic environment that you're in that it's hard sometimes to stay out of that when everything around you is still very much still living in that, and like constantly being pulled back. And it was just like really hard for me to be there at this time. Like I became super sensitive. Um, and so I packed up my children and we came and we moved to the farm and we've been stewarding the land here all summer. We've only been here since springtime. And we've just been spending our time just being on the land and singing our songs because I think about my ancestors that were here. And I think about, man, they must miss these songs. They must miss these dances. They must miss these things, And so let me just sing so that they know that we're here, so that they know that we're still carrying on what they left for us. And, there'd be times where I'm mowing or I'm like, weeding the bushes of berries or in the greenhouse, and it's like, you need to go meditate. Like something would come to me and I just drop everything and just go and sit and be and listen. And that's what I've spent my this summer doing and making my offerings. And, my whole nervous system has like regulated and I've become even more sensitive now. I guess getting out of survival mode. But I also believe that because this is my ancestral lands, that, most of Ungwahuma people across our mother's back have been removed from their innate environments. They have been displaced. And so when you displace a people from their natural habitats, the disruptions that happen within their bodies is what we've been experiencing for the past 400 years. So to be back here on my ancestral homelands, it's just been a whole new type of embodiment and remembering who I am as a Kanien'kehá:ka woman and taking note and trying to change the energy of the land, getting into regenerative agriculture, remediating the soil, having 2 greenhouses for my children to grow food. And nobody's on a time schedule right now, and it's great. Like just learning to be on our own time, not the 9 to 5, not, there, it got to the point where I was like, you just need to get to bed because, and then I'm like, wait, what do you have to wake up early for though? Like, it's not like we have to go anywhere, like it was a lot of deprogramming and learning to just be. And it still feels wrong sometimes. I still struggle. Like I'm not, I don't know. Like my kids are so free. And it just, sometimes it doesn't feel right, even though it's totally right,
Yeah, I find that word that you said at the end is kind of an interesting kind of conclusion to what you just talked about, that term free, with, the way that the US government is designed. We use that word a lot. But I think, the way that you described, we don't actually live that way all that much. And so I'm wondering, when you talk about free, it sounds like there's this rhythm that you're talking about. You compared it to the 9 to 5, which is, it's a pretty prescribed rhythm to it. And you're speaking of, would you say it's a more natural rhythm? Would you say you talk a lot about self rhythm too. When you talk about journey to self, it feels like there's this self rhythm. And also, I've been looking a lot at the seasons of the Celtic year. And they talk a lot about how there's kind of these certain energies with the different seasons. Like my understanding is this time from solstice to what's called embolic within that tradition, it's this energy of receptivity. And so I've been tapping into what is it like to just receive right now, and how does that feel, and what lessons might there be there. So I'm wondering about when you talk about freedom, especially since we are still part of certain things that we don't have within our control. I think maybe that's it. Maybe within the way that our culture overall on Turtle Island has developed is we think of freedom as the ability to control something. And I'm hearing you advocate for something different. And I'm wondering if you have more words to describe that.
Well, as far as the advocating, it's we would be outside working, right? And it would get to the point where it's noon, it's really hot, the kids are hot, and to have the freedom to just say, okay, let's go swimming. And then walk to the pond, walk to the creek, jump in, swim, and then come back to the farm in the evening when it's cooled down and finish up work. That was a real sense of freedom. Just to be on our own time. No pressure. Pressure, but no pressure.
Yeah, because there's still whatever you were doing outside with the gardening, whatever phase that was, whether it was planting or weeding or harvesting, that's still a piece to be done. That's what we as humans have the opportunity to be a part of and contribute. And so there's still an element, perhaps with, and maybe this is a good transition into one of the things that I really like to look at is this idea of reciprocal relationship.
Yes.
And so I think there's, within this freedom that you're talking about, there's still, I don't know if duty is the right word, and maybe it's going back to this reciprocity. And perhaps there's some insight you can share around this embodied way of reciprocity.
Well, the whole journey back to self and reconnecting is reciprocity. And going back to what I said is the love that we pour into our soil and our mother is the same love that we get back. And we get that back in other ways. We can get that back in all kinds of ways. We have to be open to receiving and to know that we are worth it, right? But I guess to go into that, I remember late summer, I had to write a few letters of thank you letters to some organizations. And I really wanted this letter to be impactful. And so I put a lot of thought into it. And I meditated on it. I made some offerings just to have the right words, right? And I wrote this long, impactful gratitude letter and I sent it out. And within 10 minutes, I'm driving down the road and there is a red-tailed hawk laying there. And to me, that is a gift. Especially knowing that I work with them. They are one of my guides. But to receive that bird, and I was so grateful. And there was just so much gratitude and so much beauty in that moment.
So I think it goes back to that idea of when you said that it's okay to listen, to give. Once again, you've never used the word permission, but that for some reason I keep trying to insert that, even though I don't think it's the right word. But this idea of a variety of gifts are okay, and learning to value those. Maybe that's the word.
Yeah, because they come in all forms. It could be a rock, it could be a feather, it could be a bird or an animal, or it could be food. It could be like you come across a new plant or something that you can forage, or, it's stuff that you can't put money on because money is fake. Money is an illusion, and it's real stuff, it's real things. It's real value. Like you can have all the money in the world, but that doesn't make you rich. Rich is being able to receive those gifts, to be open to receiving, to be in that moment, to recognize when you're, being given something.
Yeah, it seems to hearken to another term that we use for money, which is currency. And it seems to be tapping into more of the essence of that word of reciprocity creates perhaps this current. And it's acknowledging and valuing the many different pieces that are a part of that current. Do you feel like you're in that right now? Especially, I know you talked about water being an element that you really tap into. Do you feel as you step more and more into this bodied sense of being that it is this sense of current that you're a part of? Does it have that feeling or that energy to it?
Yeah, I've really been feeling like a wizard lately. Just like, just last week I was coming around the mountain at, 12:30 at night, driving back home. And I thought, man, it would be really nice to see a meteor, and I come around the mountain, and there's this green, meteor just sailing across the sky. And I'm like, whoa, that was really quick, but thank you, wow.
So I wonder about this sense of one of the things that I feel like is I use the term superpowers and shadows with these different types because it kind of helps us find our place within this dichotomy, and we're talking a lot about these amazing superpowers. I think the one that we've talked a lot about is navigating mystery. Do you feel like that's a word that describes kind of this flow that you're in as well? Is there a mystery quality to it?
Yeah, I would say so, because, it's like, usually we do fear the unknown, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fear of the unknown is a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was highlighted in your story about fear, that being afraid of anything is being afraid of self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it really comes down to it, like, well, I believe we are all reflections of one another in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. And within this mystery, I think another superpower of this embodied feeling is that these experiences can create pretty big change within people.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked about how I'm forgetting the language that you used, but there was kind of this gesture that I remember of kind of this up and down feeling of as you've tapped into this energy, how it's changing you, but also changing those around you. There seems to be that impact as well.
Oh, yeah, like the ripple effect of it all. Yeah, because as you're, changing your vibration, and that's like rippling out to everybody who's around you. And so it's almost like they have no choice but to be hit by that force as well, Yeah, it's up to them whether they're going to accept that mission, their own mission, their own journey back to self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they get to, we talk a lot about either role models or representation, or even the science of it would be what's called the mirroring effect, on how when we see somebody else experience something, our brains are somehow programming almost the experience within ourselves. You talked definitely about that effect with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like there's also it almost feels like when you talked about returning to the land of your ancestors, it almost seems like there's this quality that is a back and forth, even through space and time, when you talk about your ancestors as well.
Yeah. We had this field where I know last year that there were sunflowers there, but this year they tilled it up and they planted buckwheat. And it was just like, it was probably, let's see, maybe 9 acres of buckwheat. But what had happened was thousands of sunflowers grew in this little field. And they were, I mean, from the start of the field, they were just really, kind of, I don't know, kind of small. And then as you went to the back of the field, they just start getting taller and taller. And I spent a lot of time out there talking to them because I didn't have my community. Like, that's another part of the project is having a sustainable community built here for all my people to come back home to their ancestral lands, and to begin this journey. So anyways, with sitting with all these sunflowers, I didn't really have my people to talk to in the physical, right? So I would go out there and, the smaller ones reminded me of the children. And then they got a little bit taller, which reminded me of like the younger people, and then the mothers and the grandmothers, and then the men as they got taller, and I really believed that they were people, and that's how I treated them, and that's how I spoke to them. And I would talk about the visions that I was having and the visions that I see for this valley and for the project that I'm working on. And I grew really attached to them. I've never been so attached to plant life like this before. And so I acknowledged them almost every day. Was out there every day, almost talking to them, singing, just being. And when fall came, it was time to cut them down, and I start crying. Like it just made me so sad. And I'm like, why am I so sad about this? And people would say, well, they're just sunflowers. They're gonna come back. It's not a big deal. It'll be all right. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but like it's hitting me different. And at first I didn't really fully understand. Like I felt it at the core of my being, like a big, like just this ball of grief. And I realized that me connecting to those sunflowers and them becoming my counsel, that was all my ancestors that were there. All my ancestors that lived on that land before I got there. That's who those sunflowers represented. And so because of the wars and the things that happened here, they didn't have a chance to live out their natural cycles. They were killed and slaughtered and murdered. And so to cut them down, it was almost like doing it all over again to them. And so I didn't allow it to happen. We waited until they dried. And then I was gone back home and they ended up getting cut down. But there was only like a few stalks standing in the whole 9 acres. So I collected the seeds and I plan on planting those seeds every year someplace. I haven't picked my spot yet, but I plan on just planting those seeds and just going, because those will always represent our ancestors that were here. So even making those connections, connecting time from now to back then, hundreds of years to now, and almost healing that generational trauma. And, that's what I've been doing. And again, just following my intuition, like.
So as people begin this process or deepen into this process of embodiment, there can be some pitfalls. There can be some challenges along the way, and that's kind of that shadow side.
Mm-hmm.
And certain ones that I've kind of feel like I've identified that I would love to hear your reflection on, either as perhaps you've experienced them or you see them in others, or you're like, actually, Amber, I don't think that's quite it. Whatever response you have. But I'm curious what you think about if you're not rooted in this embodied experience, it can feel like a detached place.
Oh, yeah.
And people may actually not even care about connecting with people anymore because there's this feeling or this sensation that's almost a drug or a high. And so they separate. Or perhaps there is some sidestepping of a sense of responsibility that comes with that. Like you talked about that reciprocity, and perhaps there's the danger of not being part of the currency, but still just taking from that feeling. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've witnessed or experienced, or you're like, let me give you a different view of that.
I think that is definitely something that I've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
I think more so within my parents. Because, there was a lot of taught behaviors, deep-rooted beliefs that were taught to me unconsciously through them, and a lot of healing that I had to do because of it. And so because I worked through so much of that, being present with them just was like to really look at my parents and the different things that they would be going through, or, different behaviors. I guess in a way, I did understand them more. Like, okay, I know what this is because I just had to work through that. Or I know what that is because I just spent the last 6 months just trying to like get out of that, and now I understand it. And then, yeah, also like, I guess being back in community, back home, or with anybody in general, recognizing that we can only meet others as far as they met themselves. And to not take things personal. And to just know that they just haven't found that place within themselves yet. And that's for them, not for me.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, you said that there were some of those that you felt like you had to journey through. You had to take, months to identify and retrain yourself, perhaps in a way that felt more rooted or more healthy. And so I'm wondering if you have anything that you can share to use as a source of wisdom for people perhaps going through that same journey of trying to make sure that these places of embodiment that they're inhabiting are within more of that superpower realm.
I'm not sure. I'm sure I do.
Fair enough. You're like, I did it. But in this moment. Yeah. And maybe it's just going back to things that you shared at the beginning, because perhaps in many ways, your story is your journey, because it is the experience that you now have to share with people as a potential route. And so, you shared with me at the very beginning that this idea of journey back to self is really the crux of what you're sharing. So perhaps maybe another way to ask the question is as you went through these journeys of letting go of some of these shadow aspects, like the inability to connect or the sidestepping of responsibility, is there something about this journey back to self that particularly helped you with those challenging aspects?
I guess being able to show up differently. Being able to show up for others differently. But I guess, and this might be jumping back a few moments ago, but another thing that just come to mind is I realized how much I'm able to detach from others. And then even questioning, like, is that like okay? Like, is that kind of rude? Is that kind of mean? Like, my ability to detach from others? It's even like family. I guess that's when I really think about it, is when I catch myself being detached or detaching from family, friends, and like, is this healthy? Like, is this okay? You know, and I'm still trying to figure that out myself. I've grown up with an emotionally neglectful home, and so I kind of go back and forth. Like, is it because of this, or is it just because of this knowing now that I have of self? Like, you know, and just still trying to navigate and figure that out and balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like part of it is the willingness to stay in the question.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have this question, and you found at this stage, you found one particular way to articulate it, and just saying, I don't have the answer yet, but I do feel like if I continue to commit to showing up in these ways, there's the possibility of more clarity or an answer of some kind.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, we are reaching the point of the hour mark, and this has been such a beautiful current of a conversation as we've moved through a lot of different topics and ideas and sensations. So I want to express a huge amount of gratitude for your time, especially today. I know it's a special day with your family. It's your son's birthday. And so the fact that you were willing to share that with us just makes me feel so incredibly special and gifted. So thank you so very much. And there's one final question that I ask everybody who comes on this podcast. And it's a bit of a twisty question. It's a bit of a surprise question. So let's see what you got. And the question is, what's something that you wish I would have asked that I didn't?
And does everybody give you an answer?
They do. And what's fun is that everybody's answer often surprises them.
I feel like we covered so much.
We did. We really did. Yeah.
Okay, and we're not going to follow through with the question though, right? Or the answer?
Like, are you going to have to answer the question that you're thinking about? Is that what you're wondering?
Yeah.
It's up to you. I will leave that decision up to you.
I think going into the topic of menstruation.
Yeah. And so what would be, let's pretend that it is you, the listener. What is the question that they could ask themselves, whether they're male-bodied or female-bodied, about menstruation that they could ask themselves? And we can leave it there without you having to answer it, but perhaps leaving it as a question for the listener to ask themselves and reflect on.
How comfortable are you with your own blood and with others? Especially like if you're a male, like with your wives or your partners or your girlfriends, around her time. And women, like, how comfortable are you with yourself and your relationship to your moon time?
Whew, yeah, that's a big question. It's a deep, important question. And I think the key of it is that word comfort.
Mm-hmm.
How comfortable are you? And what is that? What does that entail?
I mean, because that was a big thing for me, is the comfortability level of my own menstruation, being taught that, you know, you don't talk about that, you keep that hidden, like, you know, that's, yeah,
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kawenniiosta. It was such a pleasure. I'm so delighted to be connected with you in this current that is being here on Turtle Island, and I look forward to our next connection and conversation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation, and I love these conversations. They totally feed my spirit. So thank you so much for your time. Gratitude always. Gratitude will take us far.
And with that, until next time.
Anakiwahe.
Hey, Earthmate. How did that episode resonate? Did it stretch you, inspire you, or perhaps irk you? I'm here for it, so please reach out. Besides the socials, we have a community to practice with on our website, eartharchetypes.com, where more Earth archetypes can guide your path and become dear friends. A great place to start is the quiz to discover your type. Oh, and on your way, I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. See you again soon.